Some of the programs that have been trialled both in Australia and around the world include carbon taxes, emissions trading schemes, straight up regulation, and in Australia we now have a program called direct action. Carbon taxes are where governments put a set price on each tonne of greenhouse gas emissions and then makes the industry pay it. And the theory goes that, like everybody, industry doesn't want to pay more tax than it has to, and so there's a financial incentive for it to cut its emissions and therefore pay less tax. An emissions trading scheme is quite different and more complicated. A government puts a cap on the total emissions that can come from a range of industries, and then it creates permits for each tonne of emissions that is allowed under that cap. It then sells or gives the permits to companies that are liable under the emissions trading scheme, and the company needs to hold enough permits to cover all the emissions they release over a year or another period of time. If it doesn't, it needs to buy permits from another company, or in some cases from an overseas market, or face penalties. Therefore, the government isn't actually setting the price of polluting. It's actually the supply and demand of the permit market that sets the price. In other places, such as the US and Canada, they use regulation. That's essentially laws that say, for instance, excess emissions from power plants can't occur, and therefore it's left to the company to decide how they will comply with that law. They'll either put in more efficient equipment in a plant, or they might even shut down an old plant. The Abbott government has put in place direct action, its alternative to the former government's carbon price. It has two parts. The first is a multi-billion-dollar fund, which it uses to pay companies and landowners to cut their emissions based on who offers them these cuts in emissions at the lowest cost. It has a second element, which is essentially that they will create baselines for industry that they cannot go over in terms of their emissions. If they do breach these emissions, there will be some kind of penalty, but the Abbott government has said this won't be punitive, and therefore there's some scepticism about how tough this will be.